Good afternoon, everyone. Well, evening, it's true. My name is Antonieta Mercado. I just wanted to thank all of you for being here. And before we start the program tonight, I wanted to acknowledge that we are gathering in Kumeya land, and it's unceded territory, and the Kumeya have been in this land from millennia, from time immemorial, as they said. So we are thankful to the Kumeya that had kept this land, and we are learning to be the best guests we can be. So thank you. Now I want to acknowledge this is the last session of a long program of teachings. Before I introduce my colleague, Dr. John Halaka, I just wanted to say my name. My name is Antonieta Mercado, and I'm a professor in communication, and I'm also the director of this program in Latin American Studies. And today, our last teaching is about contested truths and counter-narratives, talking about Palestine. So let me introduce our dear colleague, Dr. John Halaka, who has been very gracious and very important in organizing this series of teachings that started in November last year, and today is the last of this academic year. So I'll introduce you. Give him an applause.
Thank you all for being here. I'm really grateful to see you all here in the audience and to listen to this conversation. As Antonieta said, this is the last of a series of events that we've been preparing. And when I say we, I'm talking about Gaza at USD Coalition, a coalition of faculty and alumni working in conjunction with student organizations to help educate our community about the violence in Gaza and about the history of occupation and repression that has manifested itself in this genocidal violence. We've had 12 events. This is the last of 12 events this year, and I put together all of the flyers. And I have to say that I'm extremely proud of our coalition for being able to pull this off. It's a series of events that explored numerous topics. There are video recordings of most of them on our YouTube channel. So if you go to Gaza USD YouTube channel, you'll be able to watch almost all of them. There's still 3 more that need to be posted once they're edited. I'm not going to talk very much, but I just want to bring up the escalating crises that is happening across campuses in the US. There are a lot of students being arrested, their rights to speak, to demonstrate being suppressed. There are a lot of politicians and university presidents overreacting by bringing in police, by claiming that we need the National Guard, by dismissing all of their calls for a ceasefire, calls for justice, their calls for a dignified peace, dismissing it as being anti-Semitic rhetoric. And we need to reject that. We need to reject that loudly and persistently. And even though this is the last of our events, and we've been very focused and very disciplined at presenting educational events to our community, there are also additional things that are going to be happening this year. The Palestine Solidarity Committee at USD, an undergraduate organization, will be organizing a demonstration on campus, some sort of a sit-in, something that builds on, honors, and expands the protests that are going on across campus. Please keep an eye on that. And if you want to get on the mailing list, write your name. I'll have a piece of paper, and I'll be happy to send you information on that. We're also in the process of preparing a memorial for those that have died, those that are suffering, those that are hungry in Gaza. And we have not yet set a date, but that will be coming up within the next week or two, because we don't have that much time left in the semester. And a lot of people in Gaza don't have much time left, period. The crisis is far from over. The genocide is far from done. The apocalyptic destruction of a tiny bit of land that houses 2.3 to 2.4 million people is almost complete, but there are still 2.3, 2.4 million people living in the midst of unimaginable ruin. Our coalition decided that this is not the end of our teaching. We're going to continue this in the fall. So please keep an eye out for more events, more educational events, and pass the word out. Let people know that we're here to inform, to educate our community about peaceful resolutions to the conflict. Let people know that we reject being silenced, that we reject being called anti-Semites because we call for ceasefire and freedom. And we will stand together and stand strong against that sort of erasure and silence that has been going on. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague, Diane Keeling. She will introduce herself. But I'm, again, very grateful for you all being here. I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. Professor Susie Babka brought some cookies, and they're in the back. And so please help yourself to them on the way. Thank you all.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. I am thrilled to be a part of this panel, to be a part of the teach-in. I have to say I'm a bit shy because I'm not typically trained in Palestine and Gaza and the conflict that has been happening. I'm a rhetoric scholar. My scholarship focuses on posthumanism, Black radical thought, difference feminism, and I do a lot of rhetoric of science as well and about rhetorical theory. So my training, even though there are critical scholars in rhetoric, that hasn't been a part of, or I should say critical studies that focuses on Palestine and the Middle East, that hasn't been a part of my training. So today I'll be talking about scholars who have done that work and what I have learned from them. And so I hope you can graciously forgive me for whatever mistakes I make as I talk about this, but I know that sometimes teaching is also a way of learning, that by holding myself accountable to talk about these issues, I'm learning, I'm making mistakes, and that's part of this process, to be brave and know that mistakes will be made, but it's about the grit and returning and continuing to work through this. So my talk is about counter figures and counter frames of Palestine. The panel is about overarching counter narratives. So how does, what are the dominant circulating stories about Palestine in the US? And how do people respond to those dominant stories that are oppressing folks in Gaza and Palestinian citizens? How do people respond to the circulating discourse? First, I'd like to give a little lesson about what rhetoric is, because most people think about it as the political pejorative sense. That's just rhetoric. It's lies. It's not, it's falsehoods. It's not something to be trusted. And that is what rhetoric can do. But rhetoric is also about healing and about hope and about creativity and creating different worlds. It's about how we are moved in the world to think and behave, which could be very harmful, which could be listening to falsehoods and believing falsehoods, but it could also be about revealing truths and revealing different kinds of worlds where we live together in a more prosperous kind of way. So figures of speech in particular are what I'll be focusing on, and figures are repetitions within discourse that we return to because of how they have been framed. So a figure, just like these chairs, there's little differences between these chairs. So when you hear something in speech again and again, it's just like a pattern. And dominant discourses, dominant narratives repeat. And so in that circulation, we have to be critical thinkers. That's what the tradition of rhetoric teaches us, critical thinkers to respond to those dominant narratives with counter narratives. And so this presentation is going to show you what are some of the dominant narratives that have been primarily circulating in the US, and how have people who are on social media, in particular TikTok, responded to those dominant narratives with counter narratives, counter figures of repetition. So I will be depending primarily on the work of Didier Fossat. He is a scholar of rhetoric and social science in France, and he published recently in February in the Journal of Genocide Research about the rhetoric of denial. And in particular, the framing of it, he drew attention to the way that academics in the US were silenced, and primarily silencing themselves after October 7th. He draws on this poll that was done by the University of Maryland in November, the second week of November, that was distributed to 3,214 Middle East political scientist experts in the field, and got an excellent response. If you're a quantitative scholar, this is a really phenomenal response rate of 936 scholars saying that they were 69% of the Middle East experts were self-censoring. 98% of those assistant professors, for those unfamiliar, these are faculty members who do not have tenure, so they're not protected yet from being fired in the university. And 76% of full professors were also self-censoring, silencing themselves. And then 61% of Middle East experts in the rest of the world. 83% of this had to do with restraining criticism about Israel, and then only 9% were restraining their criticism of Palestine. So he was looking at this trend, and he wanted to understand, okay, what was happening? What was circulating, the figures of speech circulating in the dominant discourse in the US that were causing scholars to self-censor themselves? And he found three, he draws our attention to three figures of speech. The first is presentism, the second is hyperbole, and the third is distortion. I'm gonna work through each of these. I'm gonna talk to you about how these figures of speech work, and then how activists on social media were responding and creating counter narratives specific to each of these types of figures of speech. So first is presentism. This is, if you're really familiar with this conflict, this is one that recurs each time any war, battle, conflict erupts in Palestine. It is the radical dehistoricizing of the events that took place prior to that moment of conflict. And so it's not looking at history, it is only focusing, so for example, that history began, the history of the conflict began on October 7th, 2023. So it ignored all of Israel's violations of international law for several decades beforehand. It presumed that Palestine had no right to defend itself. So the dominant frame was that if you discuss history prior to October 7th, you're justifying or you're vindicating the crimes that were perpetuated by Hamas militants. So to explain is to excuse, and that was causing scholars to self-censor as a result. So here were some videos that were circulating. There were a variety of them. I just chose a couple based on circulation rate that I thought were compelling. A lot of this was happening through recirculating news programs, clips from news programs that were contesting the presentism. So I'll show you first a news program, just a minute of it.
Anything that we've ever seen before in recent time. Apart from wiping out Hamas, what's Israel's main aim here? Would they occupy more territory, given the scenes that we're seeing today, which reminds many of the Nakba?
Well, to answer your question, it's important to look at context, and the context is very rarely mentioned in the media. Israel is the product of the Zionist movement, and the plan of the Zionist movement was always to create an exclusively Jewish state on all of Palestine. In order to do that, you have to remove the non-Jewish indigenous people. That's the plan, and that's never actually changed. The Nakba was an attempt to make it happen, but back then Israel was...
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there, but this was a common circulating type of trope in social media, is to repurpose news articles and show them. Another one was to show television shows. So some of you might know Anthony Bourdain. He had a famous show. What was the name of that show? No Reservations. And so this is when he went to visit Palestine. So this suddenly was recirculating on TikTok.
Getting in and out of Gaza from Israel is truly one of the most surreal travel experiences you could have on Earth. Over 1.5 million people live in Gaza, most of them considered refugees, meaning they're not from the place they are compelled to live now. In most cases, they're either prohibited from or unable to leave. Israel decides who comes and goes, what gets in and what stays out. Apart from journalists, aid workers, emergency responders, very few people are allowed to cross into Gaza. In 2005, the Israeli Defense Forces left the Gaza Strip and all Israeli settlers were removed. Now inside Gaza, Hamas is in charge. Considered a terrorist organization by both the United States and Israel, they got elected in 2006. This is Layla Haddad, a native Gazan, journalist, and author of The Gaza Kitchen.
I'll stop there, but it's significant that this is providing some historical context to what was happening in Gaza and the occupation of Israel in the Palestinian territory. So 2 examples. Okay, the next figure of speech is hyperbole. And this is when someone exaggerates statements. So they, instead of being accurate and specific, there's exaggeration taking place. So after October 7th, there was a lot of circulation exaggerating some of how people would respond to critical claims. So for example, if a person mentioned the illegal settlements of Israelis in the West Bank that were condemned by, and that are condemned by the UN, the dominant hyperbolic frame would be that the Israeli state has a right to exist, right? So not actually taking it on, instead suggesting simply that they have the right to exist and this is a part of their existence in the state. When students during protests would chant intifada, thank you, which is Arabic for uprising, the dominant hyperbolic frame, of course, is that is inciting genocide of Jews. Criticism of Israeli policies also turned into the hyperbole of anti-Semitism. So how were folks on social media, in particular of the last one, responding? Some of the strategies,
For Israel to starve and slaughter Gaza violates the deepest beliefs of Judaism. That's why we are here as anti-Zionist Jews to say not in our name. Not in our name will we allow you, Israel, to weaponize anti-Semitism to justify your genocide of Gaza and apartheid occupation of Palestine. Not in our name will we let you try to divide us because we know that our liberation is bound up in the liberation of Palestine and we are not free until we are all.
So that gives you just one sense. And then the second one as well is going to be about protests, just showing that protests are happening. I think living in San Diego, I felt quite disconnected. I didn't really see a lot of protests or actions that were happening. So social media was a really important way to just witness that there was uprising, there was outrage taking place. And then this first one is in response to the idea of critiquing the Israeli government is a form of anti-Semitism.
Rain or shine, free Palestine.
Are you Jewish?
Yes, I am.
Is it anti-Semitic to criticize Israel?
Let me say this very, very clearly. It is not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel.
Are you Jewish?
Yeah.
Is it anti-Semitic to criticize Israel?
No, to criticize the Israeli government is like there's a lot of Israeli Jews who are criticizing the Israeli government and have been since I've known anything about it.
Right now, what we're seeing is horrible atrocities committed in the name of a Jewish state. Israel, as a state, as a Jewish state, claims to represent all of us. Jewish fear.
Okay, so that gives you a sense, actually asking. And so if you don't have Jewish folks in your life, you might not have a sense of what is anti-Semitic or not. So to demonstrate that there's a variety of perspectives within the Jewish community.
Rain or shine, free
Okay. Our last figure of speech is distortion, and this is the misrepresenting and disputing of the crimes that are committed in Gaza. And so the dominant frame is that Israel has the most moral army in the world, that it spares civilians as much as possible. I recall that one in particular when I was reading the New York Times or watching the news, this sense that, that civilians would be notified in advance to move. But there are countless examples of that not happening, and that actually schools were being targeted. Another dominant phrase was suggesting that genocide is not the right term for Gaza, and so all about qualifications, that it requires the annihilation of an entire group rather than the physical destruction in part or whole, or that it requires intention stated in discourse rather than in actions. And so one of the most vivid ways that activists on social media have been responding to this is actually showing this. And there are so many that show children that are really hard to watch. So I'm not going to show the children suffering, but I am going to show righteous anger, which is really important in activist work. Unfortunately, they did not share this young woman's name, but I'll show a clip of her speaking an exceptional example of speaking truth to power.
انتوا قاعدين بس تقسموا فيهم، اطفال بيطلعوا تحت القصف الاطفال بيطلعوا، والله تو شهرين بقول لك طلعوها تحت القصف. المدارس هذول فيهم ناس ما بيقدروا يمشوا عشان يطلعوا، حقيقة خبروهم عشان يطلعوا على طول. انتوا ولا خبر ولا شيء، بس تقصفوا ولا همكم. المدارس هذول فيهم ناس مريضين مشلولين ولا بيقدروا يمشوا ولا بيقدروا اي شيء، عاجزين.
And then another one, this is a Palestinian journalist showing what it is like to actually live in a neighborhood just out within Gaza.
Also in a place far away from the window. That's the view from the balcony. There is literally no view. You can't see anything. I come very close to my house. That's my window right now. That's the view. People in the street are calling for ambulance.
So social media serves as an excellent form of witnessing and testimony that dominant narratives we're not showing, the journalism, which my colleague Antonieta Mercado will be talking about next. So in conclusion, that counter-narrative work was happening through social media, and it has become a really powerful form to raise awareness and to provide resources for those who are learning. You, of course, have to be really careful and sensitive of what you are watching, and really think about the credibility of the sources, but at the same time, it provides vivacity, which is liveliness and animation. It makes you remember, and it moves you through really powerful forms of pathos, ethos, and logos. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Keeling. Yes, probably I will need that. Thank you very much, Dr. Keeling. I think Dr. Diane Keeling has left a good star for me. Let me just grab my presentation. The United States, anybody guesses what the United States is one of the countries that prides itself for its First Amendment and freedom of the press and its journalism, right? And in general, the Western world, right? Anybody can guess what is, there is this organization, Reporters Without Borders, that does this yearly index for freedom of the press. I usually teach it in my international media class, which I'm not teaching this semester, by the way, but I teach the Press Freedom Index in many countries. So anybody can guess what is the U.S. Press Freedom Index this year? Anybody?
What is the scale?
It's 100, and the lower the scale, the better. It's like, Norway, and usually there are like one or two. And then the 180, which is 180 countries, is the worst. I think it's China. One of those. Anybody guesses?
43.
Excuse me?
43.
Very close. It's 45. So the United States is not at the same level as Norway or other, especially Northern European countries, I think those, or even Costa Rica. I think Costa Rica is like 19 or 17. So why am I telling you this? Because one of the preoccupation of mine is who is reporting from Gaza, and I'm going to walk you through. This is very important, right? I'm from Mexico, and I'm living in the border in the United States. Between the United States and Mexico is very clear, right? We have gone through the war on drugs and around violence, and journalists are being paying the price for reporting on that violence. And whenever there is a journalist that is killed in Mexico, there is a big uproar in the United States, signaling how violent it is in Latin America, how violent it is in Mexico, right? And I am very surprised that there have been close to 100 Palestinian journalists killed since October 7th. And probably you haven't heard much about it from the news media, from the mainstream news media. So something that I wanted to convey to you is that who is reporting from Gaza? Dr. Keeling showed a video of a girl. We have been seeing reporters, like community reporters and Palestinians reporting from Gaza, people who just took into reporting the atrocities that they have been living every day. So we have 11-year-old Sumaya Abu Shah and 9-year-old Lana Abu Jamul as reporters, wearing the press vest and reporting on violence against children in hospitals and talking about violence. I mean, just imagine a 9-year-old, right? In the US, we try to shield children from seeing blood or violence. These are reporters, right? And there are also other reporters, Motaza Saisa, who was reporting on Instagram, and Visan Ouda, who continues to report from Instagram as she has moved from her house in North Gaza into different locations, and now she's in Rafah. So last year, there were 120 journalists killed in the world, in the whole world. 77 of those journalists were killed in Gaza, alone. So about 75% of all journalists killed. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, the CPJ, it has been the deadliest period since they have been reporting the data since 1992. Since October 7, about 35,000 people have been killed, 1,200 Israelis, and 34,000 Palestinians. About 77,000 Palestinians have been wounded in Gaza, and many others have been disappeared. This is the latest data. I periodically check on this data. This is updated today. And there have been 97 journalists and media workers dead in the conflict since October 7. 13 of them were women. 92 of these journalists were Palestinian, 2 were Israeli, 3 Lebanese. 16 journalists were injured, 4 are missing, 25 are arrested. And there are many other attacks, threats. This is a funeral of Palestinian TV journalist Abu Hattab, and he was killed along 11 of his family members. in Cayunis in past November. So there is no doubt that why a 7-year-old, well, a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old will take on reporting what's going on in their neighborhoods as they are trying to protect themselves or trying to be safe as they are being bombarded. Sumaya Wushang said that she was inspired by the Al Jazeera journalist who was killed by Israeli military strike in Jenin in 2022. And Palestinian journalists in Gaza have had to document the war while protecting themselves from the bombs and the attacks by the Israel military. So this is just one example. Ibrahim Kanan, who is 50 years old and works for Al Gad TV based in Cairo. He's a Palestinian journalist who is in Gaza and has been covering the war. He says the third day of the war, or the fourth day of the war, between the third day of the war or the fourth day of the war, I received the news of the death of 11 of my family members. After a period of about a month, I also received the news of the death of 17 family members that were killed in the Arbala, were his direct cousins. So he says, you're talking about 17 people, and his house was demolished. So the thing that keeps him motivated is our duty and ethics require that we defend the rights of people wherever they are in any region of the world, whether in Gaza or outside Gaza. Your work as a media journalist or journalist with a nation and professional humanitarian message who must perform his mission to the fullest. This is just another journalist. I'll just skip by. I have 2 or 3 more. This is Kuala Al-Khalidi. She's 34 and she has been reporting to Palestine TV. And also one of the biggest challenges is to connect on the internet. They need to be online, and with the bombardment, with the displacement, they have had that interrupted. So she thinks our genuine belief that we have the moral high ground and have a more truthful narrative, we are fully convinced that we have rights and that we are the owners of the narrative. Therefore, we consider the Palestinian pen and Palestinian media to be a clear and very important means of conveying the truth and holding Israel accountable for its crimes. I'll skip that, and I wanted to share with you, this is another, I can share my presentation with you. This is another testimony of another journalist, but on February 28th, the last week of February, first week of March, there were about 55 top international journalists, mainly from the UK, but from other places and the US, some from the US. Among them, Christina Amanpour, Alex Crawford, Jeremy Bowen, who is a very, very big journalist from the BBC, Deborah Patah from CBS, signed a letter asking the Israel military, the IDF, to let journalists go into Gaza because they are not allowed to go into Gaza. They used to be allowed, international journalists, that you might be wondering why so many Palestinian journalists, because they are the ones reporting. Any kind of Western or non-Palestinian journalist who wants to go into the zone, they have to go through the Israeli military. And they have been controlling where they can go. They call it embedded journalism, right? That we know that from the Iraq War, right? The war in Iraq, in the US. So they have to be embedded with the Israeli military. So journalists in the West have been demanding access to Israel. So I'll just share with you, this is about 3 minutes. And this is Alex, let me just remember her name. This is from Alex Crawford from Sky News. So she's talking about why it is important to have access to Gaza.
Now, a group of Egypt calling for free and unfettered access to Gaza for foreign media. The letter sent by correspondents and presenters from the main broadcasting outlets based in the UK also appeals for better protection for journalists already reporting in the territory. 55 journalists have signed the letter, including Sky News' Alex Crawford, the BBC's Jeremy Bowen, Orla Guerin and Fergal Keane, as well as CNN's Christiane Amanpour. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by Alex Crawford, who joins us from Erbil in Iraq. She is, of course, Sky News' special correspondent, and as we've just been saying, is among the signatories of the letter. Thank you very much for joining us, especially while you're on deployment, Alex. Just tell us what the rationale was behind this letter to begin with.
Well, the main thinking is that we're all terribly frustrated and feel we're not really doing ourselves justice. We're not doing the story justice, and people aren't hearing particular information because foreign journalists aren't on the ground. And this is despite multiple attempts to try to get access into Gaza since October the 7th. From October the 7th onwards, there have been groups of people, teams of people, media organizations from all over the world trying to get access into Gaza, and we haven't been able to. And that definitely compromises what is probably one of the most important developing events in certainly in the region for many, many decades, possibly in the world, and will have ramifications for many years to come.
Alex, you've travelled the world with your reporting and you're in Iraq at the moment. How unusual is it, in your experience and through your career, to have been unable to access an area, particularly one that is the centre of a major story?
I think it's not unusual that some governments and some regimes will try to keep you out, and that presents definitely a challenge for journalists to try and report accurately inside. But in the past, and even now, we're talking about governments or authorities or regimes that do not describe themselves as democracies, which Israel does describe itself as. Israel is proud of boasting that it is a liberal democracy with an open media, and yet it is deliberately blocking journalists from all over the world from getting into Gaza. That is the key difference. I mean, in the past, journalists like myself have had to use boats to get into Myanmar, have had to use all sorts of tactics to try to get inside closed off areas. And we've managed it. This one is monumentally difficult because it is an extremely small area that we're talking about. There are only 2 border points, and it is really, really very massively locked down by Israel and also by Egypt. And seriously, most governments around the world should be worried about that.
And I was just reading, because you wrote a blog, didn't you, for the Sky News website, that you said that last month the Foreign Press Association attempted to persuade the Israeli High Court to allow journalists in, but it was refused for security concerns. Tell us more about what they said to you after that ruling then.
Well, it was the Supreme Court of Israel, and it was brought by the Foreign Press Association. As I said, there have been multiple attempts by not only the big media organizations around the world, but also individual journalists, BBC, Sky, ITN, ITV, all signed, Channel 4, all signed a letter in November as well, none of which have had any impact or made a jot of difference. The Supreme Court said that they couldn't... They wouldn't lift the restrictions imposed by the IDF, and the IDF argued that this was because journalists could be put at risk in wartime and they could endanger soldiers by reporting on troop positions.
I will leave it there. Well, journalists across the world have expressed, and I will finish with another slide, but they have expressed their frustration with these restrictions to world journalists. I mean, they have been allowed, but only embedded in the Israel military. That's what Steve Hendricks, the Jerusalem bureau chief for the Washington Post, says. It's incredibly frustrating that we don't have more access to Gaza, but they are not budging. They are not letting anybody in in except these very strict, very controlled guided tours. And those are the news that we're getting from the Washington Post, from Gaza. I mean, he's the main bureau chief, and he's reporting. I just wanted to conclude my talk tonight. I'm not even talking much about U.S. journalism, but I just learned that Palestinian journalists have been appealing to U.S. journalists to boycott in 2 more days the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is a very important event where a lot of journalists get invited to the White House and they have a dinner with the president. So what they said in this letter is, in Gaza, journalism is synonymous with putting our lives on the line as Israel methodically targets us in its desperate bid to silence our voices. Many journalists in Gaza have said that they have been targeted by snipers in the Israeli military. And as journalists reporting from the belly of the beast, that means the US, you have a unique responsibility to speak truth to power and uphold journalistic integrity. The Palestinians implore US journalists, it is unacceptable to stay silent out of fear or professional concern while journalists in Gaza continue to be detained, tortured, and killed for doing their jobs. So I will close it there, and I will entertain any questions you have at the end, but I will welcome my colleague, Dr. Bahar Davary. There you go.
Can I use the other one?
You can use the other one. Let me just go.
My papers.
Is that the first one?
No.
Okay, let me just start from the beginning. Okay, there you go. You can just click here.
Thank you. Can I use this other
Yeah, I
microphone?
think so.
Does it work? Yes.
I think it works, right? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. This thing's gonna sound. Okay. Let me know if you need. Okay. This one.
Thanks. Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My name is Bahar Davary. I'm a professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. I'm going to take it back to Adam and Eve, as we do in religious studies. One more. Oops, one more. The Balfour Declaration was what really started this thing, not October 7th. And that's the reason why I thought it would be reasonable to start here. I'll be talking about contesting some of the slogans of the protests that we have witnessed in the past 7 months, and the counter narratives of accusing these narratives as being, these slogans as being anti-Semitic, and by referring to 4 poets. So I think what I'll do here today is mostly reading from 4 poets and then hearing from one other poet. So it started before creation of Israel in 1948. So as you can see in this map, 1,000 Palestinian balads and villages were destroyed. These people were displaced from them in 1945. And then afterwards in 1947, 1948, several other were displaced. And all of these was based on the idea of racial superiority of one group of people to the other group of people. Winston Churchill said in 1936, this is obviously before the creation of Israel, that the indigenous population had no more right to the Palestine than a dog in a manger had the final right to the manger, even though he may have laid there for a very long time. And no wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has taken place. Quoted from Finkelstein, Beyond Kutzbah. So you see in this map the way that Israel has expanded from 1947, and then the UN plan in 1947, which gave more than 50% of the land to the Jewish refugees. and then taken more land. So 750,000 people were displaced. A victor's peace was imposed. Under the guise of the peace process, theft of land, occupation, torture, illegal settlements, imprisonment became the ongoing daily life of Palestinians. And the first prime minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, himself said that if he were an Arab, he would not make peace. So the idea that we often hear that, well, the Arabs rejected peace, is something that the first prime minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, himself refuted and said there has been anti-Semitism, the Nazis, Hitler, Auschwitz, but was that their fault? They only see one thing. We have come here and stolen their country. And so what he suggested is that we have to finish them, and they may forget in one generation or two. So these are some of the images that from long time prior to October 7th, where it shows the illegal wall, with a quote from the Fourth Geneva Convention stating that they lead the wall, which is about 30 feet tall and about 440 miles around the West Bank, and it is actually illegal according to international law, and separates people, has been separating people from their livelihood, from their farms, from their olive trees. Destruction of water infrastructure, destruction of olive trees, bulldozing of homes, humiliation checkpoints, which my colleagues talked about. And at the same time, we have seen that Israeli politicians and generals themselves have declared their crimes proudly. Cabinet ministers like Gallant, the defense minister, who said Israel was fighting human animals, quote unquote, and ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip, no electricity, no food, no fuel. Heritage minister said, blew up and flatten everything in the north of Gaza and give that land to Israeli settlers. Israeli President Isaac Herzog wrote notes on bombs dropped on children, women, and men, all civilians. Member of the Israeli Knesset called for the use of doomsday weapon to flatten Gaza without mercy. Even before all this, in September of 2023, Prime Minister Netanyahu held a map of the Middle East, pointing to it where it has basically wiped out Palestine. There was no Palestine in that map. There was no outrage about these. Nobody found these genocidal. Protest erupted, as John talked about it, and now we see it on campuses across the United States as well. And one of the slogans in these protests was, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." In Arabic, it rhymes. So it's "Min al-Bahr al-Nahr." Did I say it right? "Min al-Bahr al-Nahr," from the river. "Min al-Nahr al-Bahr," from the river to the sea. And I can't see my own slides because it's too small. There is a resolution that wants to call this, ban this, because it's anti-Semitic and offensive, to say "from the river to the sea" because it's supposedly genocidal. There's a very good explanation for this by a few people. One of them that I found useful, by the way, when I looked up YouTube, when I YouTubed "from the river to the sea," all I found was statements that this statement is very dangerous, it's genocidal, it calls for the destruction and killing of all the Jews in Israel. And it was the Rethinking Palestine, Al-Shabaka, where Maha Nasser, professor at University of Arizona, was talking about this, and she called them Nakba denialism. She called it Nakba denialism. So the destruction of Palestinian balads, Palestinian towns, and all of that, and displacement of people is ignored completely by reference to Hamas, which we hear repeatedly, and by using of the slogans of the protesters to make them opposite of what they really are. So in her explanation, she mentioned that in 1967, in order to regain Palestinian national identity and their connection to the land, with Palestinians who were separated, as we saw in one of these maps in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, as you see with settlements in the pink triangles, they called this slogan because they were thinking of having one state in which Israelis and Palestinians, Muslims, Jews and Christians can live together. After all, there's a historical example. Palestine is a great example for Jews, Muslims, and Christians living in harmony and welcoming, in fact, the refugees, Jewish refugees. There had been 10% of the population who had been Jewish even before the beginning of refugees coming from Europe. So the idea of this was that from the river to the sea means one country, historic Palestine, for Jewish refugees and Jews who had lived there before, and Muslims and Christians who were living there, all of them together with equal rights, as opposed to a Jewish state which gives preference to Jews with the apartheid regime, which even outlaws intermarriage up to this day. So people of different religions cannot legally marry in Israel. So I wanted to make reference to a few poets who lived and worked and wrote and struggled and resisted before all of this, to see how their way of struggle was not at all the idea that they have to take over and get rid of Jews in the historic Palestine. Ghassan Kanafani is one of those people, like famously known as the commander who never fired a gun. His weapon was a ballpoint pen, and his arena was his newspaper pages. He was the editor of a journal called Hadaf, which means goal, aim. But he was also believing that if there is no armed struggle, then nobody will pay attention to them. No TV network will pay attention to them. He himself did not pick up a gun. He wasn't armed, but his weapon was his pen. He wrote poems, he wrote letters, he wrote stories, which are really worth reading. I recommend people who don't know his work to read his work. I'll read one of his poems, which I've posted outside of my office door too. I wish children didn't die. I wish they would be temporarily elevated to the skies until the war ends. Then they would return home safe. And when their parents would ask them, "Where were you?" they would say, "We were playing in the clouds." There's a longer story. It's called Letter from Gaza, a letter from Gaza, which he wrote in 1956. He was born in 1936 and was assassinated in 1972. He only lived 36 years. So in 1956, he was supposed to go to a program in Sacramento to become a civil engineer, but he refused to do that, and he decided to stay in Gaza. This is longish. I don't know if I have time to read some of it. He writes to his friends. He says, "I've never seen things so clearly as I do now in 1956. No, my friend, Mustafa, I have changed my mind. I won't follow you to the land where there's greenery, water, and lovely faces, as you wrote. No, I'll stay here. I won't ever leave." Why don't we abandon this Gaza and flee? Why don't we? Mustafa, do you know Nadia, my brother's beautiful 13-year-old daughter? Again, this is 1956. That evening, I bought a pound of apples and set out for the hospital to visit Nadia. I knew that there was something about it that my mother and my sister-in-law were hiding from me, something which their tongues could not utter, something strange which I could not put my finger on. I loved Nadia from habit, the same habit that made me love all that generation, which had been so brought up on defeat and displacement that it had come to think that a happy life was a kind of social deviation. Nadia, I have no idea whether I was the one who said it or whether it was someone else behind me, but she raised her eyes to me and I felt them dissolve me like a piece of sugar that had fallen into a hot cup of tea. Together with her slight smile, I heard her voice, "Uncle, have you just come from Kuwait?" Her voice broke in her throat and she raised herself with the help of her hands and stretched out her neck towards me. I patted her back and sat down near her. "Nadia, I've brought you presents from Kuwait, lots of presents. I've brought you the red trousers you wrote and asked me for. Yes, I bought them. Say something, Nadia. Don't you want the red trousers?" I felt her tears wetting the back of my hand. She lifted her gaze to me and made as if to speak, but then she stopped, gritted her teeth, and I heard her voice again coming from far away. "Uncle," she stretched out her hand, lifted the white coverlet with her fingers and pointed to her leg, amputated from the top of the thigh. My friend, never shall I forget Nadia's leg, amputated from the top of the thigh. No, nor shall I forget the grief which had molded her face and merged into its traits forever. I went out of the hospital in Gaza that day, my hand clutched in silent derision on the 2 pounds I had brought with me to give Nadia. The blazing sun filled the streets with the color of blood, and Gaza was brand new. Mustafa, you and I never saw it like this. The stone piled up at the beginning of the Shujaiya quarter, where we lived, had a meaning. Even in this Gaza, throbbed with sadness, which was not confined to weeping, it was a challenge. More than that, it was something like reclamation of the amputated leg. No, my friend, I won't come to Sacramento, and I have no regrets. I won't come to you, but you return to us. Come back to learn from Nadia's leg, amputated from the top of the thigh, what life is and what existence is worth. Could I play a piece of, is it all right? Mm-hmm. Here's Ghassan kind of funny talking about what the meaning of resistance is for him.
Seeing that the civil war, has been quite fruitless.
It's not a civil war. It's a people defending themselves against a fascist government, which you are defending. It's not a civil war.
Well, the conflict.
It's not a conflict. It's a liberation movement fighting for justice.
Well, whatever it might be best called.
It's not whatever, because this is where the problem starts. This is a people who is discriminated, is fighting for his rights. This is a story.
Why won't your organization engage in peace talks with the Israelis?
You don't mean exactly peace talks. You mean capitulation, surrendering.
Why not just talk?
Talk to whom?
Talk to the Israeli leaders.
That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean?
Well, if there are no swords and no guns in the room, you could still talk.
No, I had never seen any talk between a colonialist case and a national liberation movement.
But despite this, why not talk?
Talk about what?
Talk about the possibility of not fighting.
Not fighting for what?
Not fighting at all, no matter what for.
And people usually fight for something and they stop fighting for something. So you can't tell me even why should we speak about what?
Well, stop fighting.
Or talk about stop fighting why?
Talk to stop fighting to stop the death and the misery, the destruction, the pain.
The misery and the destruction and the pain and the death of whom?
Of Palestinians, of Israelis, of Arabs.
Of the Palestinian people who are uprooted, thrown in the camps, living in starvation, killed for 20 years, and forbidden to use even the name Palestinians.
They're better that way than dead, though.
Maybe to you, but to us, it's not. To us, to liberate our country, to have dignity, to have respect, to have our mere human rights is something as essential as life itself.
Okay. Back to here. Yes. Very good. Some people believe that, well, he was actually, his village was destroyed when he was 12 years old. So he had to go to Lebanon and then to Damascus in Syria. And finally, he was assassinated when he was taking his other niece to go around the town. He was assassinated. They put a bomb on his car, so when he ignited the car, it exploded and he was killed there along with his niece. But one of the things he's known for is what I've written here in Arabic, Adab al-Muqawama, the literature of resistance. He's famous for his literature of resistance, and also that he was not only interested in freeing land, but rather freeing humanity, and not just Palestinians. I'm afraid this might be falling. His resistance was not only for freedom for Palestinians. So, for example, one of the things he used to do in Hadaf was to create posters such as this, which, as you can see, is a collaboration between Vietnamese throwing off the imperial colonial yoke, as well as Palestinians. You hear now from ICJ, from the foreign officer of the South African government, that she said, we've learned things from Palestinians in throwing off the yoke of the apartheid regime in South Africa. They have learned from Palestinians, and so Ghassan Kanafani is one of those people who have brought about Adab al-Muqawama and Tahrir al-Insan, not Tahrir al-Ard, freedom of humans, not from the yoke of colonialism and imperialism, not just freedom of land. The other poem that is an icon of Palestine's national cultural icon, and the one who Edward Said called Palestinian Envoy to Human Consciousness, is also an example of gentleness, depth, and thoughtfulness. His poetry is filled with metaphor of expulsion and forceful displacement. I'll read one of his poems. He was born in 1941, so he was 7 years old when he was expelled from his Balad in the Upper Galilee, along with his family, and his village, the town was razed in 1948. He writes this about migration to Lebanon. Do you remember our migration route to Lebanon, where you forgot me in a sack of bread? It was wheat bread. I kept quiet so as not to wake the guards. The scent of morning dew lifted me onto your shoulders. This was from Hurriya's teaching. Let me move on to this other one. Oops, I better do this. He writes a lot about love because he was actually, when he got back into Haifa, was living there for a while, he fell in love with an Israeli woman, and he refers to her in his poetry as Rita. Her real name was not Rita, but of course they could not marry because, as I mentioned, intermarriage not only then was not allowed in Israel between people of different faith, even up to today it's not allowed. But one of the other long poems that Mahmoud Darwish wrote was about Muhammad ad-Durra. Some of you who are old enough remember this image. It was even on mainstream media because it was captured when Muhammad ad-Durra, the 12-year-old, was killed as he was hiding behind his father in this particular shooting, and he was killed. Recently in Gaza, Jamal ad-Durra was interviewed because now in this particular bombing, this time his two brothers were killed. His brother's wife was killed, and his brother's daughter was also killed. He says this about this recent bombing. He says, the occupation deliberately kills children. Every day they kill a child. The scene of Muhammad's killing still repeats itself after 23 years. Muhammad's blood is still flowing. Israel does not target military objectives. They kill civilians with Western weapons. That was Jamal, Muhammad's father. I don't think I have time to read the poem. It's longish, right? Yeah. So let me end read the third poem by Mahmoud Darwish. The war will end, he says. This is Mahmoud Darwish. The war will end. The leaders will shake hands. The old woman will keep waiting for her martyred son. That girl will wait for her beloved husband. And those children will wait for their hero father. I don't know who sold our homeland, but I saw who paid the price. This other one, probably most of you know and have heard of him, Rafat al-Harir, who was a poet, a teacher, a professor, about whom one of his students, Jahad Abu Salem, said, when Rafat taught English to me and my friends, he ensured that we should read Malcolm X. As he often reminded us to call him, he emphasized that the learning a language requires understanding its culture and being critical and mindful that language is not free from questions of power and representation. Rafat's journey in learning and teaching was filled with struggles. His life was challenging, marked by significant family losses, yet he persevered, fought back, and wrote back. And his famous poem is If I Must Die. I want to end by playing another poet who wrote this spoken word, was written in 2011. So he talks about the bombardment. He's not talking about this recent one, but the one in 2011. And I'll end with this.
I wrote this poem when the bombs were dropping on Gaza, and I was the media spokesperson for the coalition, doing a lot of the organizing. And we had stayed up to about 6 o'clock in the morning, perfecting every soundbite. And by the end, if you're Palestinian, you know most Palestinians get tired and start pronouncing our P's as B's. So we become Palestinians by the end of the day. So I was practicing my P's all night. And the next morning, one of the journalists asked me, don't you think it would all be fine if you just stopped teaching your children to hate? I did not insult the person. I was very polite. But I wrote this poem as a response to these types of questions we Palestinians always get. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre that had to fit into sound bites and word limits, filled enough with statistics to counter measured response. And I perfected my English and I learned my UN resolutions. But still, he asked me, Ms. Ziyada, Don't you think everything would be resolved if you would just stop teaching so much hatred to your children? Pause. I look inside of me for strength to be patient, but patience is not at the tip of my tongue as the bombs drop over Gaza. Patience has just escaped me. Pause. Smile. We teach life, sir. Rafif, remember to smile. Pause. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians teach life after they have occupied the last sky. We teach life after they have built their settlements and apartheid walls. After the last skies, we teach life, sir. But today, my body was a TV'd massacre made to fit into sound bites and word limits. And just give us a story, a human story. You see, this is not political. We just want to tell people about you and your people. So give us a human story. Don't mention that word apartheid and occupation. This is not political. You have to help me as a journalist to help you tell your story, which is not a political story. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre. How about you give us a story of a woman in Gaza who needs medication? How about you? Do you have enough bone broken limbs to cover the sun? Hand me over your dead and give me the list of their names in 1,200 word limits. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre made to fit into sound bites and word limits and move those that are desensitized to terrorist blood. But they felt sorry. They felt sorry for the cattle over Gaza. So I give them UN resolutions and statistics, and we condemn and we deplore and we reject. And these are not two equal sides, occupier and occupied, and 100 dead, 200 dead, and 1,000 dead. And between that war crime and massacre, I vent out words and smile, not exotic. Smile, not terrorist. And I recount 100 dead, 200 dead, 1,000 dead. Is anyone out there? Will anyone listen? I wish I could wail over their bodies. I wish I could just run barefoot in every refugee camp and hold every child, cover their ears so they wouldn't have to hear the sound of bombing for the rest of their life the way I do. Today, my body was a TV'd massacre, and let me just tell you, there is nothing your UN resolutions have ever done about this, and no soundbite I come up with, no matter how good my English gets, no soundbite will bring them back to life. No soundbite will fix this. We teach life, sir. We teach life, sir. We Palestinians wake up every morning to teach the rest of the world life, sir.
That was Rafif Ziada. Thank you. Let's see which one is this.
Thank you. Sure. Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you all for coming. I'm so blown away by that last. So I'm trying to regain my composure. As a religious studies scholar, I teach here in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. One of the things that got me into religion as something to study was the belief in every religious tradition for a better world. Every single religious tradition teaches this, that there is a better world. And I believe that there can be. The other aspect to why I became involved with the coalition is because of when I was in graduate school, I came across the work of Theodor Adorno, who was a Jewish philosopher who had to flee Nazi Germany. He wrote that the premier demand upon all education is that genocide not happen again. And I kind of made that my calling, in a sense, that I would teach so that genocide never happens again. and it's happening again. And so this has been one of the most difficult times to be witnessing that we're seeing something happening on our phones before our eyes. And I also believe, though, in the power of art to maintain some sense of what's important about culture, about survival, about survivience. This is a word that was used, that has been used by Native and Indigenous communities to talk about what it means to survive in terms of a culture. Jacques Rancière said, in a broad sense, I speak of an aesthetic of the political to indicate that politics is first of all a battle about perceptible or sensible material. So yes, this is a political situation that we find ourselves in, and it starts with a sense of what we can experience, what we can sense, what we can perceive. Suleiman Mansour is one of the most famous Palestinian painters. This is his painting, The Daughter of Jerusalem. I'm going to go a little fast because I know that you've been very patient. Rachel Dedman writes, the historic thobe, which is the Palestinian dress, conjures an ideal of pure and untouched Palestine before the occupation. Suddenly, in the face of dispossession and cultural appropriation by Israelis, embroidery became an urgent task. Embroidery as a way to counter the narrative. Of all things, embroidery. So we'll look a little bit at that. So the history of embroidery goes back to Canaanite times in terms of the use of tatrees. Tatrees is a cross-stitch. Tatrees means embroidery in Arabic, and it's a cross-stitch embroidery that communicates symbols of identity, resistance, the stories of Palestinian women on their clothing. This Tatrees artist writes, each pattern has something different to communicate, especially in the olden days when women were not accustomed to interact with strange men. It was the embroidery of the thobe, the traditional Palestinian dress, that did the talking for them. Depending on the colors and the design of Tatrees, people could discern if she was married, if she was widowed, if a family member was sick, even if she was facing financial crisis. It's amazing how an embroidered piece of cloth could be such an effective tool of communication. And so here is detail from an intifada robe. So you've already heard of the term intifada. There have been several intifadas. Intifada in Arabic means to shake off, to wake up, to rise up. Thousands of Palestinians joined massive demonstrations to show Israel that its occupation was no longer acceptable. And the first is considered to be December 8, 1987. And so during that time, the Palestinian flag was banned by the Israeli government. Under the Israeli occupation, the Palestinians could not show the flag, could not display the flag. Even the word Palestine could result in imprisonment. But women stitched the flag, as you can see, stitched the flag onto their thobes. So a thobe becomes a symbol of resistance, a symbol of standing up to the occupation. And then we see that Maya Amar, who is, using Tatrees to communicate the suffering going on now. This is something that she did only regarding the month of October. So each stitch represents someone killed just in that month of October. And I don't know if you can see, but it says at the bottom, every stitch is a person. So the green is a woman, the yellow is a man, the red is a girl, the pink is a boy, and the kind of lavender color is an unidentified person, because there are still people who have been killed who have been unidentified. Their bodies are so maimed that they don't know. So she uses Tatrees to express this experience. She says, remember us as people of culture and history. Remember us as people with names and families. It's hard to remember this when we're faced with these horrific statistics every day. It's hard to remember that every statistic is a name. I wanted to also show Rashida Tlaib, who you might know is Palestinian American. She's a congresswoman from Michigan. She, at her swearing-in ceremony, she wore her thobe, and her mother is there with her. She's using her family Quran to be sworn in. I'm sorry for that typo. That should be 2018, not 2028. So she said, as a young girl, I watched my mother hand-stitch thobes while sitting on the floor with a lamp at her side. She only went up to 8th grade and then dropped out to go work in a tailor shop that made dresses in different embroidered designs to make money for her family. And this story I've heard, just in researching this, gets repeated over and over and over again as the Tetris becomes a way of making money and livelihood. During Trump's State of the Union in February 2020, she tweeted, "I'm joining my sisters in Congress in wearing white, my white Palestinian thobe to the State of the Union," in reference to the other female Democrats who wore white in honor of the suffragist movement. And then she tweeted, "Being unapologetically me is my way of protesting this impeached president." Ilhan Omar, who's sitting next to her, and apologies, I couldn't find a photograph of Tlaib at the State of the Union wearing her Palestinian dress with also seeing Ilhan Omar's face. So Ilhan Omar is sitting next to her and tweets, "Yes, sis, our presence is resistance. Our presence is resistance." And just to show you how other artists have combined Tetris with photography and other media. So this is from Rasha Al-Jundi's series of portraits. This exhibition was titled "When the Grapes Were Sour: Embroidered Palestinian Stories from Exile." She has a quote from the subject in her photographic portrait, and then the stitching is stitched right onto the photograph. So this is Michael. He said, "The Palestinian is an exile in the homeland. One is separated from their country and not treated as a human being." Here's another of her photographs. So the combination of the stitching with the photography, I just really loved this. Rana said, we inherited the love and the agony. And it seems that's another thing that I'm learning so much about the Palestinian people, is that love and agony go together. This is Saif, who's 8. He said, "Palestine is my country." And you see a dove that's been embroidered on his photograph portrait. This is the photography of Noor Nabulsi. This series is called "Steel Birds." She wanted to show that part of being Palestinian is the sharing of grief and the sharing of work around the table. And so she features Tetris in her photography as well. So here is another of her portraits. She said, since early October 2023, seeing graphic photos of our shaheed or martyrs online has become a normality for us in the diaspora. The Palestinian American women in my photographs confront the harrowing reality that Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank must involuntarily document online and broadcast the extreme brutality and loss they endure, born out of the fear that concealing their suffering may render the world oblivious to the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, which is routinely hidden by the oppressive forces of Israel. This series serves as a gesture to the Palestinian women in Gaza, forced to lay bare their trauma, literally placing it on the table for the world to witness. This is another painting by Suleyman Mansour. One thing that struck me too as I was putting this together was this quote by Laila Abu Lagoud: "Scholars should study resistance as diagnostic of power." So this sense that when we're thinking of what's going on in Gaza, the resistance to power is what gives us that metric of what it means to think about why this is so wrong. And so she says we must not romanticize resistance. And this is something that I have to continually do, is to stop romanticizing it and start understanding something about what it means to study the broader economic, political, and cultural contexts in which cultures of resistance emerge. Cultures of resistance emerge because of an oppressive power. And I am currently, as an American citizen, financing the oppressive power. And so this is very difficult to know that my tax dollars are going, and, you know, we have a new package going there. And so my tax dollars are going to finance this genocide. Suleyman Mansour, this is his rituals under occupation. He writes, "Anything that is Palestinian, even just being here, breathing and thinking, is a sensitive matter to the Israelis because they built their narrative around denying our existence. Our work, not only as painters, but as intellectuals in culture, in everything, is to express that we are here." This is a work by Khaled Hurrani. He said, "I always argued that the first Intifada was an artistic action or an artistic performance." So resistance as performance, resistance as artistic. The resistance is a kind of artistic action because for a civilian to stop a tank or demonstrate against military police, they need imagination, and it looks like fiction. What encourages you to stand for something, to dream of having a different life, a better life? This is Malak Matar. This is her work, Mother Nature Embracing the Boy and His Horse. This piece is based on the story of 4 boys, Mohammed Bakr, Ismail Bakr, Zakaria Bakr, and Ahad Bakr, who were killed by an Israeli drone strike in 2014 while playing soccer on a Gaza beach. This is a photograph of that drone strike. The 4 boys are cousins, children of Gaza fishermen who were actually prohibited from fishing by Israel at the time. So they didn't even have the livelihood at that time. And their families ordered the boys to stay indoors just for their safety, and especially away from the beach. But cooped up for 9 days during the bombardments in July 2014, the children defied their parents and went out, the eldest shooing away his little brother, telling him it was too dangerous. One of the mothers cursed both Israel and Hamas. Another, Nasreen al-Bakr, noted quietly that Hamas had killed 10 of her family members in factional fighting. So the violence can also be internal. This is another of Malak Matar's works. She said, "The reason I started painting was because I was really scared of getting killed. As a way to escape these feelings, I started making sketches as a way to let things go. In 2014, I started making art following the 3rd attack that I survived, when I actually saw people in front of me getting scattered into pieces. I painted out of necessity to help myself." This is a portrait that she did of Yusra al-Barbari, the first woman from the Gaza Strip to graduate from a university. She was a leader in Palestine's anti-colonial protests against British and Zionist occupations. She suffered a travel ban in the 1970s for her political activities. This is a work by Hiba Zagut. She said in a YouTube video, "We all know that there are political tensions and events that are not simple in Gaza. Through drawing, I try to reflect all negative emotions and empty all negative emotions. 2 weeks after posting that YouTube video, she was killed with 2 of her children in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza in November of 2023. This is the last work of Mohammed Samikira, who died in October 2023 when a missile hit Al-Hali Baptist Hospital, where hundreds of Palestinians were sheltering. Staff at the Tamar Institute for Community Education, a Palestinian NGO, told Sky News he was the soul of the art studio at Tamar, and he was the one to open it every day, putting the paintings up, mixing the colors, waiting for other youth members to arrive. He loved life, and he loved Gaza, they said. This is Hibu Abunada. She published collections of poetry and a novel, Oxygen is Not for the Dead, which won second place at the Sharjah Awards for Arab Creativity in 2017. She was also killed, along with her son, in an airstrike in Khan Yunis on October 20, 2023. Her last poem was published on X a few days before her death. Gaza's night is dark apart from the glow of rockets, quiet apart from the sound of bombs, terrifying apart from the comfort of prayer, black apart from the light of the martyrs. Good night, Gaza. Hossam Madhoun is the founder of Gaza's Theater for Everybody and has been keeping a blog of his diary of what's going on in Gaza. And so he writes, the Israeli army cut the electricity completely from day one of the war, then prevented the entry of any fuel that could operate the electricity of standby generators, and bombed all solar panels on the roofs of the hospitals, Al-Shifa in Gaza City, the Indonesian hospital in the north, Kamal Adwan in Beit Leda, Al-Rantisi, the only children's cancer hospital in all of the Gaza Strip. 3 died already. Al-Nasser Hospital in Gaza City, the specialized pediatric hospital, the psychiatric hospital, the only psychiatric hospital in the Gaza Strip. All these hospitals were obliged to stop operating. Some were bombed, others damaged. Al-Shifa Hospital is the main hospital. It was a target for the Israeli army from the beginning. They bombed the baby delivery section. They bombed the outdoor clinics. They bombed the main gate several times. Each time people were killed and injured. They bombed ambulances carrying injured people at the hospital gate. Yesterday, they got very close to the hospital, bombing and shooting around it as if a gate of hell opened, bombing and destroying most of the houses and buildings surrounding the hospital. And a lot of the counter narrative, that this represents to the claim that Israel has not been bombing hospitals. Sliman Mansour in December 2023 said, "The international support by people demonstrating gives us hope of better things to come. Everything is clear. We are occupied, and it is impossible to have peace here. Our fight now is to tell the world that we are full human beings. We are not less than any other people in the world." Thank you for everything tonight. So if we have any questions, yeah, we can see. So we'll just. Thank you, everyone.
We'll just recognize that we are now beyond the scheduled time for the event, but we can facilitate a few questions if you have.
If you have them.
We'll just take maybe 2 or 3.
I'll pass the microphone. Anybody have questions?
There's one here.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm there.
I don't steal the light from students. Thank you. Hi, so I'm Millie. I'm a librarian at Keeling. I'm the art librarian. So my questions were Dr. Babka, but I loved all of the presentations, and I can't wait to watch the recording because I didn't bring paper to write stuff down. So before my time, maybe 10 years ago now, There was a Palestinian art research guide posted on the library website. It was a collaboration with Professor Halaka and the head of archives and collections, Diane. Recently, it's an old LibGuide. Recently, it has had over 2,056 views since October 7th, which is just telling because there's just not enough information out there on Palestinian artists. And so part of my question, I guess, is to say, how did you find researching Palestinian artists? Because you have a lot of content. And, before October 7th, actually early in 2023, a curator in London emailed me asking me to update some of the dead links in the LibGuide. And then when Samir Halaba's exhibition was cancelled, the art librarian at the Indiana University contacted me asking if she could borrow stuff from the LibGuide. I'm like, of course. And then I've had, I think it was a 8th grader from the West Bank, Palestinian child, researching an artist contact me because of the LibGuide again. And it's just really powerful that the silly little LibGuide of USD's copy library is getting all this attention. And so I actually just art store is migrating into JSTOR, which is you guys probably don't care about. But I was researching and testing a few things out with a Palestinian artist, and how few of them I could find in JSTOR, like maybe a few articles, but nothing in art store for like Samir, for just all those amazing artists. And I'm like, well, that's a problem. So I really appreciate I'm a visual literacy scholar. That's kind of my area of research, and I've actually just submitted a proposal to a conference later this year that's on a similar topic. Thank you. So,
I just want to thank the panel for a wonderfully powerful, moving, and important set of presentations. I think the selection of counter-narratives to wrap up this series has been absolutely brilliant, and I think this is what we need to do because the narrative has been so powerful, so strong, and so convincing, and to change the narrative is to go back and basically recreate for the Western audience the reality of Palestine in terms of its history, its culture, etc. So I am really thankful to all of you, and I wish you all the good luck, and I think we should make this video widely available and get it out there on social media and every other media that we can do. So thank you, and carry on.
It's really great. Great.
I have a question in terms of like,
really good.
what do you on the panel think is the best case scenario of everything that's going to be happening here? It's like, we know that there's the war and there's a lot of people being killed in Palestine. If you were to like envision a resolution and basically the best case that could come out of all this massacre, what would it be? Like how would you answer a question like that? Because while I was listening to the discourse here, I started like, I went on ChatGPT and I typed in what statements has the President of the United States made in regards to the protests, the protests across the United States. ChatGPT came back and it told me
Nothing.
Well, I wouldn't be long, sorry. It told me, President, okay. As of my last update, I don't have specific information on President Biden's statements regarding Palestinian protests across the United States. However, his administration has generally expressed support for the right of peaceful protests while also advocating for calm and de-escalation in situations of conflict. Right. So I was like, okay, I sort of drew my mind back to the Black Lives Matter protests. So I said, okay, let me see if there was any, because I understand that at that time, the Trump administration was in power. So it was a different tone that would have come about. And it came back and said he did make statements, right? On support of the protests, right? So it seems like there is a galvanizing of forces against Palestine. So I was wondering, like, what's the best case scenario of how this thing's going to play out? Since the leaders of the free world so-called free world, is basically up against it.
Well, just to reference Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who is Palestinian American, she wants a one-state solution. She's not advocating a two-state solution. She wants a one-state solution where Palestinians, Jews, whoever is living in the area has full citizenship, full rights to own land. Palestinians can't buy land. You know, all of these things, you know, voting, everything. And why can't we get to that place? And that, in everything I've read, that's the hope that scholars have, is for a one-state solution where people, because with a two-state solution, what I worry about is more violence, and the violence just never ends, just cycle after cycle of violence, because, it's just, I don't see a two-state solution as really changing the current situation. And I think that one thing that we're going to have to think about, obviously I want a ceasefire, but besides a ceasefire, I want to see a real solution to ending this violence. And I have to believe that we can come up with that. We're smart enough as a people, human race, to come up with ends to this madness. It's madness that this has been allowed to go on for so long, for so many decades. It's madness.
The horror that we've been witnessing for the past 7 months is that, along with witnessing bombardment of civilians, destruction of hospitals, killing of journalists, bombing of the complete destruction of universities and schools, we also see the veto, the only country that vetoes ceasefire being the United States. So if we're dreaming of what would be the ideal thing, for me, obviously, would be ceasefire first, then end to apartheid, end to occupation, one state from the river to the sea, for Palestinians and for Israelis, for Muslims, Christians, and Jews living together in peace.
Yes.
From the river to the sea.
I'll just echo that thought, and this makes me think of the work of Edouard Glissant, who is from Martinique, an Afro-Caribbean poet-philosopher. He writes about the poetics of relation and the importance of banding together with difference, so retaining the right to opacities and living together, and how that will create a creolization, which is not a melting pot, but it will be productive of creativity and poetry and a new kind of expression for the future that we can't imagine, but that those who live there hopefully will be able to create together. So not something that I can imagine, but know that there's possibility there to create that creolization.
I will just add something that I learned with one of the presenters in this series of teachings, Dr. Alain Montesset, who is our colleague in Cal State San Bernardino, and she is, her family comes from Palestine. She's from Palestine, and she said that her ancestry is Jewish as well. And she told us that what happened when the state of Israel brought colonization from the West as a technique of domination and displacement was the end of coexistence. And Jews and Palestinians had been coexisting, intermarrying, and already creolized before this, the creation of Zionism. So in some ways, this has happened before. The best case scenario was there in the ancestral land already. It's just a matter of asking why is this exceptionalism in some ways? We were listening to the reporters from the West who are trying to access Israel are saying, well, this happened to us in regimes that are authoritarian or non-democratic. This is the first time it's happening with a regime that is democratic. They are not allowing the free press to get in. So I guess the narrative is already there. That's something that I learned. Maybe we can think about it, right? For the future, go back to the past and think about it.
One more. Okay, let's do one more question.
So, quick question. As a student, I could see how like student engagement is in terms of like this topic and see like what goes on behind the scenes. But I'm curious to see like what it's like in terms of like being a faculty member. Is it like a lot of pushback, or what have your colleagues said to you being a part of this coalition, or what are the conversations like in terms of like being a faculty member here at USD?
I can just say I'm the chair of our College of Arts and Sciences Academic Assembly, and we had a robust conversation and we signed a resolution. It passed. It passed. It's being sent to the Senate, University Senate. It didn't have complete support, but there was conversation at a special meeting, and I don't think, I have not experienced resistance or I've not experienced any kind of silencing of my perspective or being a part of the teach-in. There's been some subtle conversations and nuances, which I won't get into the details because they're a little political, but they have been, I would say, overarchingly welcoming of the conversation. But what do you agree?
Do you want to say something? So one of the hardest parts of this whole situation has been our department, Theology and Religious Studies. There's been problems, and it's been one of the most disappointing things to witness that. So that's all I'll say.
I'll say ditto to that. I've been here for 19 years now, and particularly when I was an untenured junior faculty, an encounter with a chair who told me that I should not show a particular film in which Edward Said and Rashid Khalidi, both great scholars, the greatest in the field, were talking about the question of Palestine. And he told me not to show that film ever again. And so that resulted in self-censure that you were talking about, Diane, for a few years until I got tenure.
I want to wrap it. I think we should wrap it up, but we can continue conversation. But I also want to recognize Kevin Guerrieri in the back because he helped to primarily crafted the resolution. And he's phenomenal. So thank you so much for.
Those ones are not in the comment.
Oh, yes, you're in the engineering.
I will share that. I will share the resolution with you of our
Yes.
commitments, and it's been shared with the president, the board of trustees.
You want to explain the objectives or the specifics?
Kevin?
There we go.
Yes.
Just briefly, it's a one-page resolution. It has a half page of footnotes. It's a recognition of, first off, it's a call for recognition of the humanity of everyone involved.
Yeah.
With regards to Israelis and Palestinians. And then from there, it transitions into a recognition that what is happening now has been considered to be genocide, potentially by the International Criminal Court, or the International Court of Justice. And so as a point of departure, and then from there we outline, at that point, we enumerate some of the destruction that had already been taking place with regards to lives lost, physical damage of infrastructure, et cetera, and then ultimately we call for the university to examine and determine if the university is in any way supporting the war effort against Palestinians, and to disclose that. That's our main call, and for the university also to support a call for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, and a sustainable continuous ceasefire. So those are the two requests in the resolution. And not to take up too much time, but one really important nuance of the resolution too is that we didn't ask for divestment from Israel. We asked for the university to look into any potential connections or contributions by the university to our investments or in any other way to the war effort against Palestinians and to the death and destruction and genocide. And so now we're waiting for the administration to respond.
Thank you. Good job.
There is a hand.
Diane.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Abdul, and I have a question. My point of view, I see a lot of corrupt politicians in the US, along with a lot of news companies, and I think, in my opinion, why not stop and put a stop to news companies and politicians and talk about them more than doing the protest, because protests were they've been going for a while, and to be honest, I don't think it's doing much, as if we put a stop to the news companies that have been spreading lies for years now and trying to scam US citizens and lie to them in their faces. So that's my question. Why not start with the news companies?
Well, there have been several challenges, particularly to the New York Times. There was a story about Hamas that has been disputed because the sources they used were former officers of the Israeli military. I mean, there have been things that have been done, but I personally think that demonstrations are, sometimes there's slow change, right? But sometimes we think demonstrations are not useful, or we don't see the changes, especially when we're young, for young people. But just, I always tell my students, think about the American Revolution. That was the greatest demonstration, and it was really effective, right? I mean, what led to that? So I think we're a product in many places, in many societies, of social movements, but they might move in a slower way than we desire. But I think demonstrating is very important.
Yeah.
You can see in the United States, particularly, students in university campuses are going out and making, taking their body to the public forum and voicing their opposition to this censorship. So that's important in many fronts, right? Mainstream media, people have been using social media to report about Palestine or to report about different conflicts, and they use alternative media, they report on the demonstrations themselves. So I think it is in different fronts, and all of them have results, right? Yeah.
Just had a quick, I'm sorry.
No. I was going to say the third one more. Go for it.
It's kind of loaded for me to do this, but I'm running for city council up in Carlsbad, and I've also been in the Marine Corps, and so I've seen being on multiple sides of this position, but are there things that are taking place to do bridge work? I mean, you guys are the leaders of a lot of the cultural aspects here in the county. And if not, is there ways that we could do things that could create bridge work? This is great. This is also half an audience of that, like, where we can actually start discussing things about creating peace here, and then show examples about how we could do peace there. Is there anything like that happening right now? I'm so new to this, I'm sorry, so I'm just trying to figure out if these spaces they're taking, if everyone's too nervous or scared to be able to get in these places. And then I was in the Marine Corps, so I could just bully things and try to make these aspects happen with calm and serenity.
Could I just clarification, bridge, like, for example, what communities are you imagining should be bridged here?
Palestinian and Jewish communities to be able to come together here in America, like our people here, as Americans first, to be able to look at both, bring both communities together. I say this because when I was a kid growing up as a Korean, my parents told me I was not allowed to talk to Japanese people because of what took place there. And eventually, we all did, and we created bridge work through that, right? We learned to live together and be okay together. And this happens time and time again. I have friends that are Afghanis, and I've been in Afghanistan. Not going to say what I did there, but I had hate in my heart, and I learned how to do bridge work and create that. But it seems like here there's, just like the young gentleman here, he stated that media is causing conflict as opposed to bridge work, but our community leaders like ourselves here doing things to say, like, disregard what we hear out there. We are all humans and we can try to figure this out together, right? Like we were just saying, is there anything that's happening like that that we should know about and start like actually making that the voice? Or is it not, and that's something that we should explore?
I would say, like, on USD's campus, for instance, we have restorative justice, which has taken a lot from indigenous traditional, but that's just one example of bridge building. I'm just speaking from my own personal, I'm from New Zealand, but my dad's American. I have a lot of really evangelical Christian relatives that live in North County that I don't really socialize with. I haven't built bridges with them because we're so totally different. I'm just saying, it's not the formal answer from you guys, but we're already such a partisan country. You know?
I just say it just because, like, I don't know, solutions are the goal for me. I hate rhetoric and whatnot. I'm like, God, can we just solve something?
Well, I think that this is why we've been having the teach-ins. The teach-ins are about, trying to to approach these issues through respectful dialogue. Every single teach-in has been a place of respect, a place where everyone's humanity is recognized. Everyone has, been welcome to come. And so we're going to continue this in the fall, because we all know that this is going to continue as an issue. I'm hoping, my hope is that the student uprisings on campuses right now are going to do the equivalent of what happened when the students rose up against the Vietnam War. That the Vietnam War ended effectively because of student protests. So it really, I want, the young people in my community here to recognize their power, their real power to change things. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. It's recorded. So there's a saying within the Palestinian community that we don't need bridges, we need ladders, because we're so trodden down.
Yeah.
And we need ladders to cross over these apartheid walls that have been created that dominate the whole culture.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of Palestinians that are against the idea of dialogue until the Israelis acknowledge that they are occupying Palestinian people. But having said that, there's a long history of dialogue between Arabs and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis, both here and in Palestine and Israel. In San Diego, it dates back, as far as I know, and I was active in it about 28 years ago. And in many ways, progressive Jews became the Jewish Voices for Peace. They grew out of the bridge work. They may have been already progressive before, but that idea of dialogue gave them a sense of not in my name. Others didn't really want dialogue. They wanted to figure out a conversation that justifies the occupation. But when there's honest dialogue, and it doesn't happen all that often, people learn from each other. And what's really important in dialogue is listening. And in my experiences with Arab-Jewish dialogue, there were very few people, partners, as we called each other, willing to listen to the reality that Israel is a colonialist state, that is occupied, that is built on theft, that is built on genocide. Now, we didn't use that language right away because that's alienating language. But the reality was there and it had to be addressed. So a lot of these dialogue groups fell apart. As far as I know, there's not one now. One of the many horrific tragedies of this genocide in Gaza is that Palestinians and Israelis that had been working together have become more polarized. It's pretty hard to have a conversation when your buildings are being bombed, when your children are being killed, when your wives and daughters are being slaughtered. It's really hard. And the Israelis, even the so-called progressives, have retreated into a culture of paranoia. A culture of paranoia where, oh, those Arabs, those Palestinians, they're out to kill us for sure, right? So I think it's going to take another generation to rebuild any semblance of trust. Not that there was trust there, but there was trust within a few communities. And I'm generalizing, but I think a lot of the trust has been torn. A lot of the relationships have been shattered. There are probably still people on the ground. The fact of the matter is, Palestinians and Israelis live together. They deal with each other on a daily basis, but they don't deal with each other in an equitable way. So one is the occupier and the other is the occupied. There's a tremendous imbalance of power. But even in that imbalance of power, there has been some dialogue. There's been some communication. And some are really quite genuine and profound. One of the people that we were going to bring this semester, Miko Peled, to speak, and we couldn't get him, so hopefully in the fall, he's an Israeli, a commando. He was in the army for years, one of the top commandos. His father was a leading general, but then he had a conversion. and his sister had a conversion. His sister lost, I can't remember if it was her son or her daughter in one of the bombings that Palestinians did in Jerusalem. But they had a conversion. So there are individuals that have been fundamentally altered. Are they going to be altered with protest? Probably not. Are they going to be altered with art? I think so. So I think the pen, the brush, the poem will change people's heart before the protest. But I do agree, and I disagree with this young man about the invalidity of the protests. I think protests are tremendously important. They will force governments to begin to reconsider their position. Biden, when Michigan voted uncommitted, during the Democratic primary, literally within 2 days he was changing his tune.
Yep.
He didn't change it fully. He still sent whatever, $43 billion to Israel yesterday or the day before. But that's the result of people saying, no, this is unacceptable. Of people saying, I'm not going to be part of this. Of people protesting, and especially the fact that we have this history of occupation in this country against the Vietnam War. We have a history of civil rights protests that have altered this country. I think we have a responsibility to speak in every different voice, in every different language, whether it's through the arts or in the streets or through occupation. So yeah, I think dialogue can only begin to happen when there is some trust, and it's only going to be trust when there's admission of responsibility. And Israel has never been willing to admit that. Never been willing to admit. They do the exact opposite, which Diane explained so well in her rhetoric explanation. They throw things, they flip everything inside out so that the Palestinians are blamed. It's this process of blaming the victim, which has been going on for 75 years and even before. So yes, there's dialogue. There are bridges being built, but I'll go back to where I started. We don't need bridges, we need ladders. We need to be able to climb on it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Thank
for
you
coming
all
very much.